In the early 20th century, a Norwegian-American woman named Belle Gunness became one of America's most prolific and brutal figures. From her isolated farm in LaPorte, Indiana, she ran a sinister operation built on loneliness and greed. Gunness placed Lonely Hearts ads in newspapers across the Midwest, presenting herself as a wealthy widow looking for a new husband. She lured a steady stream of hopeful suitors to her farm with the promise of a prosperous future. Her only condition was that these men bring their entire life savings with them in cash, to prove their commitment and to invest in the farm. Unbeknownst to them, they were not arriving for a new life, but for their final moments. Once the men arrived, Gunness would poison them, typically with strychnine-laced coffee. After they were deceased, she would steal their money and valuables, and then process and dispose of the remains on her property. Her operation came to a dramatic end in 1908 when her farmhouse burned to the ground. In the ashes, authorities found the bodies of her children and the headless corpse of a woman, initially believed to be Belle herself. The investigation took a dark turn when the brother of a missing suitor arrived, insisting Belle was responsible for his disappearance. This prompted a thorough search of the property, leading to the discovery of numerous human remains buried on the farm. Authorities ultimately unearthed the remains of at least a dozen people, though the true number is believed to be closer to 40. The headless corpse found in the fire was later determined to be too small to be Belle, and she was never positively identified. Belle Gunness, the farm Fatale, vanished from history, with many believing she faked her own death and escaped with her fortune. Her legacy is a chilling tale of a ruthless predator who turned the American dream of land and love into a factory of death. Within the brutal hierarchy of Nazi concentration camps, certain figures stood out for their exceptional cruelty, including a young woman named Irma Grese. Known as the Hyena of Auschwitz, she became one of the most notorious female SS guards of the Third Reich. Grese willingly joined the SS auxiliary service as a teenager and quickly rose through the ranks, due to her fanatical devotion to Nazi ideology. She served as a guard at Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and finally at Bergen-Belsen. Survivors testified that Grese took a sadistic pleasure in the power she held over the prisoners. She was known for her brutal beatings with a plated whip and for indiscriminately harming inmates. Her cruelty was deeply personal. She was infamous for setting her trained dogs on inmates. She also personally selected prisoners for the gas chambers, often choosing the beautiful ones out of jealousy. When Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the British in April 1945, Grese was among the SS personnel captured at the camp. The liberators were met with scenes of unimaginable horror, with thousands of unburied bodies and emaciated survivors. Grese and 44 other camp officials were put on trial for war crimes in the Belsen trial. Throughout the proceedings, she remained defiant and unrepentant, showing no remorse for her actions. The testimonies against her were overwhelming. Survivors recounted her acts of extreme cruelty in chilling detail, painting a portrait of a monstrously cruel young woman. She was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. At just 22 years old, Irma Grese became the youngest woman to be executed under British law in the 20th century. Her legacy is a terrifying example of how the Nazi regime empowered and amplified the darkest impulses of ordinary people, turning a young woman into a symbol of pure sadism. In the 1960s, a series of child disappearances shocked Great Britain and introduced the nation to one of its most reviled female criminals, Myra Hindley. Along with her partner, Ian Brady, she was responsible for the infamous Moors murders. Hindley fell under the spell of Brady, a nihilistic sociopath obsessed with sadistic philosophy. Together, they formed a toxic partnership, deciding to embark on a series of abductions and killings. Between 1963 and 1965, the pair abducted at least 5 young people. They used Hindley's unassuming appearance to lure the victims into their car, taking them to the desolate Saddleworth Moor where their remains were later found. The crimes were meticulously planned. The pair took photographs of their victims, and in one case, made a harrowing audio recording of their victims' final moments, a piece of evidence that was central to their conviction. Their crime spree ended when Hindley's own brother-in-law witnessed their final act and went to the police. The subsequent investigation led to the arrest of both Brady and Hindley, and a trial that captivated and horrified the nation. The aftermath of their conviction was a decades-long search for the victims' bodies. For years, Hindley and Brady refused to cooperate, prolonging the agony of the families. The search for one of the victims continues to this day. Hindley was sentenced to life in prison. Despite numerous appeals and claims that she had reformed, she was never released and died in 2002, remaining one of the most hated figures in British history. Myra Hindley's iconic, cold-eyed mugshot has become the face of female evil in the modern era. Her story is a chilling study in complicity, a terrifying example of how a seemingly ordinary woman could become an active and willing participant in the most depraved of crimes. In the 19th century, while Europe colonized much of the world, Queen Ranavalona ruled the island of Madagascar with an iron fist. Dubbed the Mad Queen of Madagascar by Europeans, she was a ruthless isolationist who maintained her kingdom's sovereignty through brutal means. Ascending to the throne in 1928, Ranavalona immediately reversed the modernization policies of her late husband. She expelled foreign missionaries, ended trade agreements with Britain and France, and launched a fierce campaign to purge her kingdom of any foreign influence, particularly Christianity. She implemented a form of trial by ordeal known as the tangina. Accused persons were forced to ingest a poisonous nut. If they survived by vomiting up 3 pieces of chicken skin, they were declared innocent. If they died, they were guilty. This practice, along with a harsh system of forced labor and constant internal warfare against rival clans, led to a catastrophic loss of life. Her policies decimated the population of her own kingdom, with some estimates placing the death toll in the millions. The persecution of Christians was particularly severe. Malagasy converts were subjected to harsh punishments and public executions for practicing their faith, which she saw as a threat to her authority and traditional culture. Despite her brutality, Ranavalona's fierce resistance successfully repelled a French invasion and kept European colonial powers at bay for the duration of her 33-year reign, a rare feat in that era. After her death in 1861, her successors reopened the kingdom to foreign influence, which ultimately led to its colonization by the French. She remains a deeply controversial figure in Malagasy history. Queen Ranavalona I's legacy is a complex one of tyranny and independence. To outsiders, she was a bloodthirsty tyrant, but to some of her people, she was a powerful defender of their culture, a queen who used extreme cruelty to preserve her nation's freedom. Among the countless perpetrators of the Holocaust, few female figures have achieved the same level of infamy as Ilse Koch. The wife of Karl Otto Koch, the commandant of the Buchenwald concentration camp, she was known as the Witch of Buchenwald. While she held no official rank, Ilse Koch wielded immense power within the camp. She was known for riding her horse through the grounds, taking sadistic pleasure in whipping any prisoner who drew her attention. Her most ghoulish and infamous legacy is tied to the allegation that she commissioned artifacts from the camp. It was claimed she selected prisoners with interesting tattoos, who were then targeted. Post-war testimonies alleged that their skin was then used to create household items. This specific accusation became a powerful symbol of Nazi depravity, cementing her reputation as a monster, though definitive proof of the items remains debated by historians. When American forces liberated Buchenwald in 1945, they were horrified by the conditions they found. Koch and her husband had already been transferred, but her reputation had preceded her, and she became a prime target for war crimes investigators. Koch was arrested and put on trial by an American military court. Despite the sensational nature of the allegations, she was primarily convicted based on overwhelming evidence of her routine abuse and cruelty towards prisoners. She was sentenced to life in prison, but her sentence was controversially reduced, causing a public outcry. She was later rearrested and tried by a West German court, which again sentenced her to life imprisonment, where she ultimately took her own life in 1967. Ilse Koch's legacy is forever intertwined with the morbid legend of her ghoulish collection. She remains a potent symbol of sadistic power, a woman who fully embraced the culture of cruelty that defined the Nazi regime. In the high society of 19th century New Orleans, Madame Delphine LaLaurie was a wealthy and respected socialite, famous for her lavish parties. But behind the elegant facade of her royal street mansion, she harbored a secret of unimaginable cruelty. LaLaurie was a prominent slave owner, and rumors circulated among the local community about her mistreatment of them. These whispers were tragically confirmed after a fire broke out at her mansion in 1834. When firefighters arrived, they found a secret barred room in the attic that had been hidden from public view. Inside, they discovered a scene of pure horror, a hidden chamber of extreme abuse. The chamber was filled with enslaved people who had been subjected to cruel punishments over a long period. They were found chained to the walls in various states of torment, a sight that shocked even the hardened responders. As news of the discovery spread through the city, an outraged mob of citizens descended upon the mansion. They destroyed the property in a fit of rage, determined to enact their own justice. In the chaos of the riot, Delphine LaLaurie and her family managed to escape. They fled New Orleans by carriage and eventually made their way to Paris and evading any legal consequences for their horrific crimes. The exact details of her later life are murky, but it is believed she died in Paris in 1849. Her body was allegedly returned to New Orleans and secretly buried, though the location of her final resting place remains a subject of debate. The legacy of Delphine LaLaurie has made her mansion one of the most haunted places in America and turned her into a legendary figure of American Gothic horror. She's a chilling reminder of the absolute evil that can hide behind a mask of wealth and respectability. The story of Katherine Knight is one of the most disturbing cases in modern Australian history. Her life was marked by a pattern of extreme violence in her relationships, which culminated in a final act of horrifying brutality. Knight had a long and well-documented history of domestic violence against her male partners. She had previously injured one man with a frying pan and stabbed another with a pair of scissors. In 2000, she was in a volatile relationship with a man named John Price. After a violent argument, Price, fearing for his life, took out a restraining order against her, a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. In a final, horrific act of rage, Knight attacked Price in his home. She pursued him and inflicted at least 37 stab wounds with a butcher knife, a brutal attack that ended his life. The crime scene that police discovered was one of unprecedented depravity. After the attack, Knight processed the remains in a way that demonstrated her training as a slaughterhouse worker, a detail that deeply shocked investigators. In a final, disturbing act, she then prepared parts of the remains as a meal. She left this gruesome display on dinner plates for Price's adult children to find, a horrifying final message. Knight was arrested at the scene after taking a whole bottle of pills. The details of her crime were so extreme that the judge and jury were offered counseling, and the case has become a benchmark for horror in Australia. Katherine Knight was convicted for her crimes and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was the first woman in Australian history to receive such a sentence, a legal recognition of her uniquely monstrous crime. In the annals of crime, few figures are as shrouded in dark legend as Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary. A wealthy and powerful noblewoman in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, she holds a terrifying place in history as one of the most prolific female figures of her time. From her imposing residence at Lactus Castle, Bathory allegedly lured hundreds of young peasant women and servant girls with promises of work. Shielded by her noble status and immense power, she operated with impunity for years, her castle becoming a fortress of unspeakable horror. According to testimony from her trial, Bathory, aided by her servants, subjected her victims to unimaginable cruelty. The methods described were sadistic, including severe beatings and exposure to freezing temperatures. The most infamous legend associated with her is that she bathed in the blood of her victims, believing it would preserve her youth. While this detail is likely a later embellishment, it has become the defining image of her cruelty. Her crimes finally came to light when she began to target the daughters of the local gentry, families with enough influence to demand an investigation. The King of Hungary ordered an official inquiry, and investigators were sent to her castle. In 1610, authorities raided the castle and reportedly found victims in various states of distress. Over 300 witnesses testified against Bathory and her accomplices, detailing years of horrific abuse. Due to her noble status, Bathory was never formally tried or convicted in a public court. Instead, she was placed under house arrest, walled up in a set of rooms in her own castle, where she remained until her death 4 years later. Elizabeth Bathory's legacy has transformed her into a vampiric figure of Gothic folklore, often called the Blood Countess. She remains a chilling symbol of how absolute power, when combined with unchecked depravity, can corrupt absolutely. Before Jack the Ripper terrorized London, a different kind of criminal stalked the north of England, a woman who used a quiet and insidious weapon. Marion Cotton is widely regarded as one of Britain's most prolific serial killers. Over a period of about 20 years in the mid-19th century, Cotton moved from town to town, marrying several times. A tragic pattern soon emerged. In each of her families, a shocking number of people would die suddenly of supposed gastric fever. Her weapon of choice was arsenic, a poison that was easy to obtain at the time as a household cleaning agent. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning were almost identical to those of common diseases like dysentery, allowing her to operate undetected. Cotton's motive was purely financial. She would systematically target her husband's, stepchildren, and even her own children in order to collect on their life insurance policies. She saw her own family as a source of income to be disposed of. Her downfall came after the death of her final stepson. A parish official became suspicious when Cotton, trying to have the boy sent to a workhouse, casually remarked that he wouldn't be a problem for long, and then he died days later. The official alerted the police, who launched an investigation. A forensic analysis of the boy's stomach contents revealed the presence of arsenic, finally exposing Cotton's deadly secret after years of her activities. The investigation unraveled her entire history, linking her to as many as 21 deaths. Marion Cotton was convicted for her crimes and executed by hanging in 1873. The legacy of Marion Cotton is that of the quintessential arsenic widow. Her story is a terrifying example of cold, calculated evil hiding in plain sight. A mother who used the quiet trust of her own home as her hunting ground. In post-World War II Japan, a nation grappling with poverty and scarcity, a horrifying crime was committed by a woman in a position of ultimate trust. Miyuki Ishikawa was a respected midwife and hospital director who was later convicted in a massive infant death case. Ishikawa worked at the Kotobuki Maternity Hospital in the 1940s. She saw many babies born to parents who were too poor to afford to raise them. Abortion was illegal, and there were few social services or orphanages available. In what she later claimed was a grim solution to this problem, Ishikawa began to systematically neglect the infants under her care. She would falsify death certificates, claiming the babies had died of natural causes. Her actions, however, were not limited to neglect. There was also a for-profit enterprise. She would solicit large payments from the desperate parents, telling them that the cost of abandoning their child would be less than the cost of actually raising it. The crimes were only discovered by accident when 2 police officers found the remains of 5 infants. The subsequent investigation into the local mortician led directly back to Ishikawa and the Kotobuki Maternity Hospital. A raid on the hospital and other locations uncovered the remains of dozens more babies. The official death toll was 103, but the true number is believed to be much higher, possibly close to 170. The case caused a national scandal in Japan, highlighting the desperate social conditions of the post-war era. Despite the shocking number of victims, Ishikawa was sentenced to only 8 years in prison, a sentence that was later reduced to 4 on appeal. Miyuki Ishikawa, known as the Demon Midwife, represents a chilling form of utilitarian evil. She was a medical professional who, when faced with a societal crisis, appointed herself as the arbiter of life and death with horrifying consequences. In the early 20th century, a Danish woman named Dagmar Overbye ran a business that appeared to be a service for desperate mothers. In reality, it was a front for one of the most horrific series of child-related crimes in Danish history. Overbye operated an unofficial adoption agency for unwed mothers. For a one-time fee, she would take in their unwanted infants, promising to find them loving homes. These desperate parents believed they were giving their children a chance at a better life. The truth, however, was monstrous. Shortly after receiving payment, Overbye would end the lives of the infants she was entrusted with. Her methods were varied and included strangulation and drowning. She would then dispose of their bodies to hide the evidence of her crimes. She either burned the remains in her masonry oven or buried them in the yard of her Copenhagen apartment building. Her crimes were uncovered in 1920, when a young mother who gave her baby to Overbye and regretted her decision and went to the police. The subsequent investigation led authorities directly to Overby's apartment. A search of her home revealed the horrifying truth. Police found evidence of numerous infants in her oven, as well as the buried remains of others on the property, confirming the scale of her activities. Overbye confessed to her actions involving 16 children, but authorities suspected the true number was much higher, with some estimates reaching over 180. She was convicted and sentenced to death, a sentence later commuted to life in prison. Dagmar Overbye, known as the Angel Maker, died in prison in 1929. Her case was a national tragedy that led to major reforms in Denmark's child welfare laws. But her name remains synonymous with the ultimate betrayal of innocent trust. The story of Rosemary West is a dark exploration of complicity and the nature of shared evil. She was the wife and active partner of British criminal Fred West, participating in a decades-long spree of abuse and disappearance, from their home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, which would become known as the House of Horrors. The couple appeared to be an ordinary, working-class family. But behind closed doors, they created a world of extreme violence and depravity. Together, Fred and Rose were involved in the disappearance and harm of at least 10 young women, including lodgers, babysitters, and even members of their own family. Their victims were subjected to horrific abuse. The couple buried their victims' remains under the floorboards of their basement and in the backyard garden. They lived for years on top of this secret makeshift graveyard, raising their other children in the same house. Their crimes were only discovered in 1994 when police began investigating the disappearance of their daughter Heather. Fred West's suspicious comments led police to obtain a search warrant and begin excavating the property. The search unearthed a series of human remains, unraveling one of the most shocking cases in British history. Both Fred and Rosemary West were arrested and charged with multiple counts related to the deaths. Before he could face trial, Fred West took his own life in his prison cell, leaving Rosemary to face justice alone. She maintained her innocence throughout her trial, claiming she was just another one of Fred's victims. The jury did not believe her. Rosemary West was convicted for her role in 10 deaths in 1995 and sentenced to life in prison. Her case remains a chilling study of a domestic partnership built on a foundation of shared monstrous evil. We have journeyed through history to uncover the stories of women whose actions have defined them as some of the most evil figures of their time. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.